if you entered illegally, you can't do that. We need to do something called consular processing, where you go back to your home country and you re-enter legally. Hey guys, welcome back. I wanted to create a video for people who are considering getting married and who want to know what the green card process entails. I know that it's a scary black hole where you're just surrounded with all of these horror stories of people who've gone through the immigration process before you and who went through terrible situations with terrible outcomes and a whole lot of anxiety. But it's actually not that bad. So I thought the easiest way for me to explain what you generally need to know before you get started is to use the format of my consultations as a teaching guide. So what I'm gonna do with you today is go through a lot of the questions I would ordinarily ask during an initial consultation, and I'll explain why I'm asking those questions and why it matters, and hopefully this will give you a starting place in your immigration journey. Okay, so what typically happens is somebody will see one of my videos or find me online and book a consultation with me. And these consultations are either by video or in person if the person lives in New York. I actually do these nationwide, so I do these green card applications for spouses in all 50 states. Anyway, so once I begin the consultation, one of the very first things I want to know is who is the US citizen and who is the immigrant spouse. And just for this example, let's assume that the US citizen is a man, the husband, and the immigrant spouse is a woman. My first question will be, how did the immigrant spouse enter the United States? And the reason for that question is, I need to know whether they entered legally. And sometimes the answer is, no, I entered illegally. And if that's the answer, or if they entered without inspection, they never saw an immigration officer on their way into the US, it will trigger a whole separate line of inquiry, which is beyond the scope of this video. This video is for applying for a green card inside the US, and oftentimes, if you entered illegally, you can't do that. We need to do something called consular processing, where you go back to your home country and you re-enter legally. There are exceptions to that. I've discussed them in other videos, but just suffice it to say it's beyond the scope of today's video. Okay, so once I've established that the immigrant spouse entered legally, my next question is, how many times has either spouse been married before? And the answers I receive vary widely. I recently had a guy who was married 7 times, and 8th time's the charm. In that case, it actually wasn't the charm. They ended up getting divorced like a year later, unfortunately. But the reason I ask whether you've been married before is because I need copies of all of your prior divorce certificates. And you will need a certified copy or original if a USCIS interview is eventually scheduled. So if you've been married before, one of the first things you want to do is get certified copies of all your prior divorce certificates. It will be important. Another question that I ask is, how many children do each of you have? And there are multiple reasons for this question. The first reason is we will have to fill out a form called the affidavit of support, where the US citizen spouse, in this case the husband, shows that he's making enough income to financially support the immigrant spouse. And there's a calculation based on your household size. So I need to know how many kids you have, I need to know how many other dependents you have in your household, and I need copies of the US citizen spouse's tax returns. The other reason why I'm asking about kids, sometimes, for example, let's say in this example, the immigrant wife had a few children from a prior relationship. Let's say 2 children from a prior relationship. And let's say they are younger than 18 years old and they're living with the immigrant wife. In that situation, I would want to know, is the US citizen husband's name on any of the kids' school documents? Does he declare them as dependents? Because if so, I will get copies of all of those documents and submit them with the green card application to show that this is a good faith marriage. It's a great piece of evidence to show that your stepchildren are depending on you with financial documents and any school documents that might corroborate that. One of the questions that trips a lot of people up, and I've mentioned this in other videos, is when I ask the immigrant wife in this example if you've ever worked without authorization in the US. Now, let's say in this example, the immigrant wife entered the US 3 years ago as a tourist and has been here unlawfully after her 6-month stay expired. So she was here for 6 months legally, and then unlawful presence began to accumulate, and now she has 2.5 years of unlawful presence. In that situation, I see a lot of people reply, no, I've never worked without authorization in the US. But a lot of the people who've told me that actually have worked without authorization in the US. And I need to explain to them that we need to be completely truthful on the green card application. And in fact, if you're married to a US citizen, your unauthorized employment or unlawful presence in the United States should not impact your green card application as long as you don't lie about it. I'll often receive some pushback when I say this, and an example I like to give of how the immigrant spouse's employment might come up during the interview is, let's say the USCIS officer asks the US citizen husband, when you met your wife, what was she doing with her life? Where was she working? And he knows for certain that she was working in a restaurant for cash at that time under the books. Now he's in an immigration interview with a federal officer, and he's in a bad position where he believes he needs to either lie or deal with serious consequences, or tell the truth, and there will be serious consequences for his wife. In reality, the reason the USCIS officer is asking that question is because they just want to see that you're in a good faith marriage. They're not trying to create major problems for the wife having worked without authorization. And the correct thing to do in that situation would have been for the wife to disclose the unauthorized employment on the green card application, and for the husband at the interview to answer completely truthfully. One of the main questions that I receive during the consultation is, what documents do we need to start collecting? And the answer generally, first of all, it depends on the specific marriage, so it's fact specific, but some minimum required documents are your original divorce certificates, your current marriage certificate, birth certificates, at least for the immigrant spouse, but oftentimes also for the US citizen spouse to show that he's a US citizen, and tax returns. Additionally, a medical examination for the immigrant spouse is required. These are the basic mandatory documents. There might be other ones depending on your specific situation, but what I actually do is I spend a lot of the consultation discussing other evidence of your good faith marriage. When I say evidence of a good faith marriage, I'm referring to specific evidence that shows that this marriage was not entered into solely for the immigrant spouse to receive an immigration benefit, in this case, a green card. What USCIS likes to see depends on the specific marriage. If you guys have traveled together, even domestically, even if you went to the Jersey Shore a few times, evidence of that is crucial. If you took a domestic flight somewhere, flight confirmations, hotel itineraries, photographs from your trip, receipts from the trip are all amazing evidence of a good faith marriage. If you have a child together, the child's birth certificate is one of the best pieces of evidence that you could submit. And in this situation, we would bring the original birth certificates and all original documents with us to the eventual green card interview. When we begin the application process, everything we submit is a photocopy, but down the road, we will need all the originals. If you have joint health insurance, car insurance, life insurance, any of these documents are amazing evidence of a good faith marriage. Joint bank accounts, joint credit cards, Joint cell phone bills are all evidence of a relationship. Other things that USCIS likes to see is that you're living together. So evidence that you have driver's licenses listing the same address, that you received joint mail, copies of the mail, you filed your tax returns jointly using the same address, you have a lease agreement or renter's insurance listing both of you and your home address. All great evidence that will make your application easier to approve. So the final thing that I want to discuss is what the green card process looks like. What I do is I'll prepare 5 or 6 different applications depending on your situation, along with all of the evidence of your good faith marriage, and I'll mail it to a processing center in Illinois. Oftentimes it's Chicago, but it depends on which state you live in and how we mail it. So these applications will typically include a family petition, a green card application, a work permit application, permission to travel, which is called advance parole, and an affidavit of support form, which is the financial sponsorship document I discussed earlier in the video. Along with these forms, I'll prepare all of the evidence with a table of contents explaining what everything is, and I'll organize it and make it look nice and mail it off to USCIS. About a month later, USCIS will issue a biometrics appointment notice. It's a fingerprinting notice for the immigrant spouse to appear at a service center to have their fingerprints taken and a photograph taken, which will then be used on their eventual work permit and green card. 2 months after that, we will typically receive an approval notice for employment authorization and advance parole. So they'll get a nice federal ID card that allows them to work, and usually it will also allow them to leave and re-enter the US, although I generally don't recommend traveling with that card. If you have questions about that, speak with me or your attorney. Several months after the work permit arrives, there are 2 things that typically happen. Either 1, you will just receive an approval notice in the mail and then your green card arrives like 2 weeks later. Or 2, you'll receive an interview appointment notice for you to appear at a USCIS center with your spouse for a green card interview. This interview is what freaks a lot of people out, especially the immigrant spouses tend to be very nervous about these interviews, but suffice it to say that if you're in a real marriage, you really have nothing to worry about as long as you prepare with your attorney. In fact, when I prepared these applications for people, one of the things that I spend the most time doing is working with the spouses before the interviews so that they are fully prepared to answer questions they don't know the answer to bring all of the required and mandatory documents, and just to generally know what to expect so they're as prepared as possible for the interview. Alright guys, so that brings us to the end of today's video. I hope this helped dispel some of the myths and rumors around the green card process for spouses of US citizens. If you have any specific questions about this video, please put it in the comments below. If you have any specific immigration questions that you want to speak to me in private about, please schedule a consultation. I would be happy to assist you and your loved ones navigate their way through the immigration process. If you're new to my channel, be sure to like and subscribe. I'll put out a new video on a weekly basis, and I'll see you guys next week for another video.